Don't forget that you're listening to Nightmare. I hope they don't ask for too many explanations from me. It's erotic. I don't have them. I wish I did. I wish I could understand. You know, the kind of people who build theories around everything, who try to make sense of all this chaos. God knows I've tried. My family's insultingly boring. I don't mean that in a bad way. On the contrary, that lack of problems gave us an extremely peaceful life. We're not rich, but we've never lacked anything. We don't take fancy vacations, but we're able to visit family at least once a year. And, well, my parents have a happy marriage. There's not much to tell. And for a long time, I thought all the members of my family shared that simple life. In early 2014, I realized that wasn't the case, and that's where this story begins. Curiously, it all started with a photography workshop. They had us pick someone from our family and take pictures of them and their surroundings, trying to capture the essence of their personality. Thinking of something interesting, I asked my grandfather if I could do it about him. Even though my grandparents were, like us, very calm and quiet, that house, over 150 years old, was already a character in itself, or at least that's what I thought back then. I took some photos of my grandfather, and then it was time for lunch. It was a Saturday. Grandma had made chicken soup. I was glad I had come to visit. Once, as a child, I had told her, just to be polite, that her chicken soup was really good, and ever since then, she believed it was my favorite dish. Every time she knew I was visiting, she made it for me. That's how sweet she was. Out on the street, suddenly, there was a commotion. A guy tried to rob an old man's house near the corner. He didn't realize all the man's sons were visiting that day. They chased him down, and right in front of my grandparents' house, they were giving him a brutal beating. My grandfather, a very sensible man, stepped out and asked them to wait for the police. After all, you never really know whether someone steals because they love easy money or because they're truly in need. That's what he always used to tell us. I wanted to go outside, but my grandmother stopped me. She asked me to wait inside, and I had to go back in, hearing the shouting behind those huge wooden doors. That house feels more like a convent or an old hotel than a home, but it's always been in the family. From the main entrance that opens to the street, there are two hallways, one to the left, leading to the bedrooms, and one to the right, toward the kitchen, dining room, and living room. In the center, there's a door that leads to a small garden with a little angel fountain that, for as long as I can remember, has always frightened me. I decided to ignore the ruckus and continue with the photography assignment. I approached the little angel, nervous as always, and took some photos. The lighting was perfect at that moment, and suddenly, through the blurred background in the camera, I saw someone walk past toward my grandparents' room. I lowered the camera, and there was no one, but I decided to head that way, to a part of the house that was usually closed off to visitors. My grandparents, for some reason, had always slept in separate rooms, facing each other at the end of the hallway. And at the very end, across from both doors, was the entrance to a small storage room I had never entered. I thought maybe it was time. From conversations I'd overheard, I understood they kept old photographs and things there. My mom had once used it as a studio. Among other things, it stored items left behind by the house's former residents over more than 100 years. When I approached the door, I don't know how to explain it. It felt like someone was calling me from inside, and at the same time, like someone was pushing me back from the chest, as if warning me not to go closer. Ernesto. The sound of someone calling my name from behind froze my blood. Paralyzed, I felt hands gripping my shoulders. I screamed, only to realize it was my grandmother. She had never scolded me so harshly. She told me she wouldn't tell my grandfather, but she even asked me to leave the house right then and there. She never made chicken soup for me again, not on any of the visits that followed. It hurt. More than I expected. She passed away at the end of that year without having forgiven me, and I was left not knowing what I had done to upset her so deeply. She died on December 23rd, and that night, the 24th, while families around us were celebrating, mine was also gathered, but for a different reason. At the funeral home, we cousins were talking, remembering Grandma. Mostly a group of us, around the same age. The four of us who were in high school at the time had come together. In the middle of those memories, I told them for the first time about that conflict with my grandmother, that innocent intrusion into her privacy, innocent on my part, that ended up costing me our relationship in her final months. Everyone agreed it wasn't that big of a deal. Suddenly, the voice of Sarah, a cousin barely 12 years old who we thought was asleep lying across her brother's lap, said something that only made everything I felt even more complicated. She confessed that she had accidentally seen the inside of that permanently locked room, the one that had always been off limits for as long as she could remember. According to her, it was completely covered in religious figures, and in the center of the room was a round table full of lit candles. We didn't believe her. If there was one thing our grandparents were not, it was religious. They didn't raise any of their children in either the Catholic or Protestant faiths, even though they themselves had been brought up that way by their families. We told her she was probably mistaken or imagined it, or maybe she was making it up, but her answer was clear. She said it with her eyes still closed, as if she were asleep. If you don't believe me, go see for yourself, now that the house is empty. We weren't far from the house, just 5 or 6 blocks, so we decided to go and satisfy our curiosity. We told our parents we were going out to grab something to eat, and we asked our grandfather if he needed anything from the house. Still deeply grieving, he just shook his head and continued staring motionless at the casket. We walked quickly, and for some reason, in almost complete silence. I had a knot in my stomach and felt like telling them to forget it, that it wasn't important, even though deep down, I did want to know what had upset my grandmother so much. I'm not sure if the streetlights were out that night or if everyone had gone somewhere else to spend Christmas Eve, but my grandparents' street looked more deserted than ever, darker than ever. We entered the house and turned on the light. The silence was so intense we could hear the faint hum of the bulb. We walked nervously down the hallway toward the room. When I looked at that angel statue in the courtyard that had always terrified me, this time I saw it staring directly at me. I don't know if it was the low light or just my nerves, but I could barely make out its face. And instead of its usual smile, what I saw was an expression of terror or anger. Its mouth was wide open, or at least that's what I could make out in the dim light. Before I could process what I thought I'd seen, we were standing in front of that room's door. My 3 cousins, Christian, Giovanni, and Alex, and I opened it. We found exactly what Sarah had described just minutes before. From floor to ceiling, the room was covered in religious images of all kinds. We couldn't even find a light switch, but the candlelight from the round wooden table in the center, painted in an awful sky blue, probably long ago, was enough to reveal even Hindu images in some corner of the wall. We walked around the room, trying to figure out what it all meant. But while my cousins debated, all I could focus on was one candle that was about to burn out completely. Then the wooden gate creaked. Someone had arrived at the house. I ran down the hallway, from where I could see both the entrance and the courtyard. It was my grandfather. I rushed to warn the others. We tiptoed toward the exit as we saw the hallway light turn on. He was just a few meters away from us, about to spot us. Christian and Giovanni barely made it into my grandfather's room. I lost sight of Alex, and I had no choice but to slip into my grandmother's room, trying to close the door without making a single sound. If she, my grandmother, who had always been so sweet, had gotten that angry with me, I couldn't begin to imagine what my grandfather would do if he found out we had betrayed his trust while keeping vigil over her. His slow footsteps approached and stopped right in front of the door, where I was pressed against it, trying to listen. I thought maybe he had come to get something of hers, or maybe to enter her room to remember her, or something like that. I dropped to the floor quickly and slid under the bed. He opened one of the other doors. I didn't hear clearly. I was just about to peek my head out when he entered the room. I barely managed to stay hidden. I saw his feet move to the center of the room and watched him kneel down. I thought he had seen me. I thought he would look under the bed and drag me out, furious. But no, he just reached under, feeling around for something. His hand came very close to my face, but luckily, he didn't touch me. When he touched a shoebox, he pulled it out and left the room. He closed the door. I heard his steps going down the hallway, a door closing, and then the sound of him walking away. That's when Alex came in for me. He had no choice but to hide under the candle table. There wasn't time for anything else. He saw our grandfather walk in with a candle, light it, set it down, and then leave. When I went back into the room, I noticed the candle that had been about to burn out, the one I'd been so focused on earlier, had been replaced. There were 33 candles on that table, arranged in a shape I couldn't describe. It wasn't anything I'd seen before, but it was far too precise to be accidental. Even more tormented by doubt, because obviously we couldn't talk about it with anyone. I couldn't stop asking myself, what the hell did all of that in the room mean? Why had Grandpa taken the time to come change a candle in that house, while Grandma's wake was taking place? Why did no one, not even their younger children who had used that room as a studio or storage, seem to have the slightest clue about what led my grandparents to make it so off-limits in their final years? When Grandpa's health suddenly declined in August of 2015, questioning him about it was the last thing on my mind. Just as suddenly as he was taken to the hospital, he passed away, and the family almost felt some relief that he'd be reunited with Grandma. Alex was the last person who got to speak with him. According to what my mom told me, by the time I got to the hospital, as my uncles and aunts were arriving, my cousin had suddenly gone in to see him. After a few minutes, he came out of the room, and when Manuel went in, Grandpa was already gone. I found it curious that it had been Alex, the most rebellious of us all, who'd been the last to see him. He'd always kept his distance from everyone, but when he was 14, he told the whole family he was gay. The cousins, especially those of us closest in age, had already suspected it, and maybe because we were young, we accepted it without issue. But some uncles, for some stupid reason, stopped talking to him altogether. At that time, it was our grandparents, the last people we expected, who ended up supporting him the most. So something inside me felt it was right that he had been the one to hear Grandpa's final words. However, minutes later, I found Alex and learned the truth. I hugged him. We both had tears in our eyes. He asked me to go with him to our grandparents' house. I asked what was going on, and he said he couldn't explain there at the hospital. I told him we should wait for Christian, who was about to arrive, but he said there wasn't time. We ran out. He drove like I'd never seen him drive before, all the way to the house. On the way, he told me everything. It hadn't been a coincidence. Grandpa had asked to speak with him when he felt he didn't have much time left. What Alex had thought were incoherent ramblings were actually very clear words. He told him he had seen him hiding. He had seen him in the candle room, hiding under the table. He told him again and again that it wasn't his fault, that it wasn't Grandma's fault either, and that they had to keep the 33 candles lit. That phrase over and over, it's not your fault or your grandmother's. You have to keep the 33 candles lit. Those were his final words. Before that, he had asked him to go make sure, right then, that none of them had gone out. And that's exactly why we had come to that house. Even though Alex told me I didn't have to do anything, I was convinced I needed to be there too. I went in with him, and even though it was still early, the inside of the house, even the courtyard, seemed to be getting darker by the second. I couldn't help but look at the angel, but this time, I lowered my gaze. We ran to the candle room. Several candles were nearly burned out, but one had already gone out completely. Alex asked me to help him look for the rest, and I remembered the shoebox under Grandma's bed. I left the room, and suddenly, at the end of the hallway, the figure of a little girl with a stance, almost like she was on alert, was staring at us. Just like with the angel statue, something cloaked her in darkness, leaving her just a silhouette. I couldn't make out her face clearly. She was shrouded in some strange darkness. I started to freeze up little by little until something in me snapped. I began to accept that she wasn't one of my cousins or a neighbor or anything like that. I was seeing something that for some reason I knew was connected to that room behind me. That girl-shaped silhouette suddenly ran toward me. I ran too, but in the same direction, only to dive into Grandma's room, grab the box, and rush back to the candle room. We lit the missing candle, replaced the ones about to go out, and counted again. 33. Then suddenly, a sound like a deep exhale filled the room, but we had no idea what the hell had just happened. We called Christian, and he arrived shortly after, accompanied by Giovanni and Sarah, who insisted on coming along. As best he could, Alex told them about Grandpa, and I tried to explain what I had just seen in the hallway, but they didn't seem to be paying attention. Suddenly, in the middle of the sadness and confusion, a ghostly vision seemed almost silly to talk about. Only Sarah seemed to have paid attention to it, while Giovanni and Christian were trying to convince us that we were just shaken by Grandpa's death, that it was all just a nervous breakdown. Sarah silently walked toward the candle room. I shouted, "No!" when I realized what she was doing. She picked up a candle, came over to us, and blew it out. Alex turned to her in disbelief and screamed. That's what I thought. That's what I thought at that moment when I heard the scream. But I realized it wasn't a scream. It was a sound. A sound that at first seemed like a moan, then a cry, and then something completely inhuman. As we all looked around trying to identify the source, the sound shifted into something even stranger, a kind of deep growl, so low we could feel the vibrations in our chests. When the sound stopped, the dining room light on the other side of the patio turned on, and we saw a silhouette run in. I was sure I had to be imagining that silhouette, that impossible silhouette. At first glance, I would have sworn it was a skinny man without a shirt, but as it ran and entered through the dining room gate, which is over 2 meters 30 high, the silhouette ducked as if it wouldn't have fit otherwise. I was about to ask the others if they had seen it too, when Christian and Giovanni bolted for the front door. Alex ran to Sarah and lit the candle she was still holding. "I have to stay. I have to stay," Alex kept repeating, as if trying to calm himself. When I asked what he meant, his answer scared me, though I didn't fully understand it until later. He said that until he figured out what the hell was going on, he had to stay in that house, that he needed to make sure the 33 candles were always lit, just like Grandpa had said, and I knew I couldn't leave him alone. That was the beginning of what would become the worst week of my life. It was a Tuesday, around 6 in the evening, when I arrived with a suitcase to stay with Alex, who had already moved in that morning. Nobody seemed to care. All the uncles thanked us for looking after the house, except for Uncle Manuel. It was said that the grandparents had decided to leave the house to him, because he was the last to move out and the only one who hadn't been able to buy his own, something the others thought was unfair, though they didn't dare say it out loud, fearing we might somehow be trying to keep the inheritance or something like that. Uncle Manuel surprised us that same night when he showed up at dinner time and settled into Grandma's room. He brought dinner for the three of us and tried to pretend he had come in good faith. His presence didn't just make things awkward, it made it feel impossible to investigate the room or what we had seen the day Grandpa died, especially with him sleeping just one door away. The three of us talked late into the night until midnight, and like in a movie, we were caught off guard by the sound of the clock in the hallway that led to the storage rooms, its chimes echoing throughout the house. At that moment, almost hidden within that sound, I clearly heard something fall. It was a sharp thud, like someone falling out of bed. In my mind, the sound came from the candle room, but it could have come from one of the bedrooms. I looked at the others. My uncle didn't seem to have noticed, but my eyes met Alex's. He had heard it too. Uncle Manuel got up and went to the kitchen. Alex leaned in toward me. I changed several candles, but I left them in Grandma's room, he whispered. We have to get them out of there. I noticed they're burning out faster than normal. I don't know what that means. We went quiet when my uncle came back. He said goodnight and went to bed. The two of us settled into separate armchairs, unable to shake the unease from what we'd seen in that same room days earlier. We tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop looking into the total darkness that gathered in the corners. Just as I was beginning to drift off, feeling my eyes heavy and starting to dream, a noise from the central patio made me open my eyes again. A loud noise, like something running between the flower pots, knocking them over. The glass door connecting that patio to the living room opened slightly from the outside, and I clearly heard something jump inside. I wanted to believe it was a dream, because the idea of the angel in the garden moving terrified me. As a child, I had several nightmares where that angel chased me all over the house. I was so scared it literally made my heart hurt. Then, I looked at Alex. Across the room, his eyes wide with terror, signaling me not to make a sound. Almost without moving his finger, he pointed to his right, down the hallway, near the big window. I'm sure of what I saw then. I can't swear on our grandparents' memory, but it was the silhouette of the little angel staring at me. With that angelic smile you could barely make out in the dark. Suddenly, Alex jumped up screaming and ran toward that silhouette, which vanished in a flash, fleeing down the hallway. We clearly heard the footsteps echo until they disappeared into the bedrooms. Then, the door to Grandma's room, where my uncle was sleeping, slammed shut. We ran over and found him terrified in the hallway, standing between the three doors. We asked what had happened, and when he saw us, his face changed, as if he'd just seen a ghost. Someone just went into your grandpa's room. I thought it was one of you, he said, trembling. Meanwhile, I was doing everything I could not to look toward the yard. Unfortunately for me, that figure in the center could be seen from almost every angle inside the house. I think more than being afraid to see it there, what terrified me was turning to look and finding it gone. The three of us stood frozen until Alex slowly opened the door to the room. It had barely opened a few centimeters when someone violently shoved it from the inside. My uncle screamed in fright. Maybe all of us did. He shouted, "I knew it!" and ran to the kitchen, yelling he was going to get a knife and see who the hell was in there. Alex took the chance to open the candle room. We saw one of them was out. He ran to Grandma's room, grabbed more candles, lit one to replace the extinguished one, and placed the others in a corner. While he did that, I heard laughter coming from Grandpa's room, a laugh that suddenly stopped. My uncle ran past me, pushing me aside. He threw open the door to Grandpa's room, searched everywhere, but found nothing inside. We spent the next few hours, until dawn, telling him everything that had been happening since Grandma died, and what we believed was the connection to the candles in that room. We need to get some sleep, my uncle said. We'll figure out what to do later today. I spent half the afternoon, ever since I woke up around 11, running errands all over the city. For a while, I forgot everything. For moments, my life was like anyone else's, like the people around me, or at least that's what I wanted. Around 5, I headed back downtown to the old neighborhood, thinking about what awaited me that night at my grandparents' house. When I got to the gate, I ran into Doña Laura, a woman who used to help my grandparents with the housework in their final years. She gave me a blessing and hurried off. When I went inside, Alex was already in. There were gallons of water on the dining table, strange devices, crucifixes, and Bibles. "Did you scare Doña Laura?" I asked. "No," Alex said. "She brought all this." I immediately thought, that's not a good sign. "And what did she say?" I asked. "She said a lot of things, but Manuel says not to worry, that it's all just nonsense and the lady's fantasies." "Really? After everything that's happened here? We're just going to say she's imagining things?" "She says they're duendes," Alex added, "that she's seen them run from the yard into the candle room. She doesn't know what's up with that room either. When she started helping our grandparents, it was already like that." I walked through the house to the living room to drop off my things. The idea of duendes sounded absurd, but in that house, in that place, under those circumstances, just thinking about anything even slightly abnormal was enough to shut me down, and that damned angel was smiling at me in its usual position, but with something different on its face. "Ernesto, come. We're going to do an experiment. Look at this." I didn't like the sound of those words from Alex. They opened the door to the candle room. My uncle grabbed one of the small candles and blew it out. The lights flickered for a second, as if there had been a power surge. The flames of the other candles trembled, as if someone were breathing near them. I felt a chill on my back, like it came from deep down the hallway. Even with the lights on, because of how the house was built, it always held its corners and nooks in a peculiar darkness. "Nothing happened," my uncle said. Before I could finish the sentence, we heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy footsteps, strong enough to shake the walls around us. In a panic, my uncle lit the candle and placed it on the table. It didn't take even 2 seconds for the footsteps to stop. "They want us to keep them lit. Let's just leave them that way," he said. "Whatever it is, it gets angry when we blow out the candles. Tomorrow I'll call the priest." He locked the candle room and grabbed his things. "Stay here in the house if you want. but don't go in there again. I'll see you tomorrow." And just like that, the same way he arrived, he left. Alex, however, didn't seem to have heard him. He was focused. "I don't think they're angry about the candles," he whispered. "What?" I asked him. "I don't think they're angry about the candles. I think they'd prefer them off, don't you think?" "I honestly don't get you," I said. There were 2 more candles almost burned out, at least the ones I could see from where I stood. "Let's see what happens if they go out," he said as he walked back to the kitchen. He started sprinkling holy water all over the house. At that point, I didn't know how safe it was to stay there anymore, but I couldn't leave him alone either. Truthfully, the only thing I didn't want was to be alone. Christian reluctantly agreed to come, even though he was very scared. He showed up around 10. "There's a lot to do at the shop," he said, and I knew it wasn't just an excuse. Christian helped his dad run a small auto parts store. "Do you have the address?" he asked me when I told him about the house. I know it all sounds hard to believe, but what happened that night in particular, what I'm about to say, the neighbors next door and across the street can back me up. You can go ask them anytime. We were having bread and milk for dinner when Christian arrived, a bit later than he'd promised. He kept trying to convince us to leave, to let Uncle Manuel deal with it if he wanted the house. "It's not about what's left," said Alex. "It's about what it was. This was our grandparents' house. We all have memories here. We all grew up here. It belongs to all of us, not to whatever's coming out of that room. We were here first, or maybe not," Christian replied. "Maybe that was here before." We fell silent for a while and tried to finish dinner. A while later, a deep sigh seemed to come from the candle room. Some of the candles were almost out. I told Alex and Christian, "We want to see what happened if we leave them like that." A whisper began to spread through the house. Alex and Christian walked toward the hallway, and I got up to leave my plate in the sink. When I arrived, it was clear. The whisper was growing louder. It seemed to come from the pipes. I don't know if it was another language or if I simply couldn't understand it, but I couldn't stop staring at the pipe. I removed the mesh screen that acts as a guard, and the whisper stopped for a moment, as if it had been caught off guard. Then, a moment later, it continued like nothing had happened. I could almost see an eye peeking out from deep inside. "It's my imagination," I thought. Nervously, I walked toward the hallway to find my cousin. Then, I realized someone had turned off all the lights. Only the kitchen, where I was, still had light. Another sigh came from the room. "The other candle," I thought, and I ran toward the hallway. As I turned the corner toward the living room and hallway, I saw what looked like a woman running toward me. A woman in a wedding dress. Again, I'll say, it was very dark. It could have been anything. I just remember that instead of continuing straight, I turned right toward the vestibule that led to the street and ran outside. I wished everything would change at that moment, that once I stepped out, it would all be over and life would go back to normal. But the truth is, that heavy and gloomy atmosphere seemed to have spilled outside. It felt like it filled the entire street. The only thing I could think of was to run and knock on the neighbor's door, Patricia's. I liked her a lot. I trusted her. Not enough to knock on her door at 11:30 at night, but in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. Patricia had tried her luck in the U.S. since she was old enough to work. She saved enough money to buy a house on that street when she came back to the country, and she'd been slowly restoring it. She wasn't even 35 yet and was already living her dream. Again, I liked her a lot. And in that moment, she was my only escape from the house. When she opened the door, I realized I hadn't thought of any excuse. I asked her for her phone because I had lost mine and told her I needed to make a call. She told me to come in while she looked for it. I noticed how uncomfortable she was about the hour, but there would be time to apologize later. He asked me how I lost my phone, and I told him the power had gone out at my grandparents' house. "Well, look, it's back now," he said, pointing to the window of a room facing the street. It was a room that remained closed most of the time, one my grandmother used for sewing, one of her most cherished hobbies. Her silhouette was perfectly visible right then, working on the sewing machine, so clear behind the curtain that it looked like there was a spotlight behind her. Suddenly, the silhouette turned to face us, and from the house's gate, I saw Alex and Christian bolt out toward us. The silhouette stood up and changed completely. I swear she was wearing that wedding dress. The same woman I had just seen minutes before in the hallway. Even though Patricia doesn't know everything that happened during those days, and we obviously didn't tell her everything, she is a witness to what happened at that moment, to that silhouette, and also that she spent the whole night in that room. That night, none of us could go back. My mom went to the house to pick up a few things. I didn't find out until later that afternoon. I asked her why she went without telling me, and she answered, "I don't need to ask permission to go to my parents' house." Obviously, I had no response to that. My mom had spent the whole morning with my cousin Sarah, and the two of them had gone together. "Did you see anything weird?" I asked her. "Other than the mess you guys left, nothing. The whole house felt really cold, though. And I saw what your grandparents did to that room you've all been talking about. It's creepy, and dangerous, too, having that many candles lit," she replied. I asked her about the candles, and she told me she had lit a few. She said it like it was nothing, completely unaware of what that meant to us. Right then, I sent Sarah a message through Facebook to ask her what had happened and why the hell she hadn't told me. "I'm going to Grandma and Grandpa's house early tomorrow with my brother," she replied. "See you there." The thing is, my grandparents' house comes alive early in the morning. Around 7 a.m., the ladies on the street start their daily routine of cleaning outside their homes, a time they usually use to chat. The morning breeze filled the air. For a moment, standing there in front of the door, unable to bring myself to go in, I missed my grandmother more than ever before. Even just looking at the blurry window of the sewing room, I could almost swear I still saw her there, just like every time I visited. I was distracted by the sound of Patricia's gate opening. When I saw her come out, I walked over to apologize for how weird I'd acted with her that night. Pati, I'm sorry about the other night. I really wish I could explain it all, but it's complicated, I told her. She smiled and said not to worry, that we'd talk later. We never did. She walked down the sidewalk toward the main street, and behind her came Mrs. Marta, her mother. I wanted to apologize to her too, in case I'd woken her up that night. I'm not going to tell you why I did it, ma'am, but you think I won't believe you, she interrupted. Before I could say anything, she told me the neighbors had been saying things about my grandparents' house for years, but she always thought they were just old people's superstitions. I don't know what's going on in that house, or what's going on between you and Alejandra these days, she continued, but I hope you know that your grandmother is still there. I don't know if she's angry with you or protecting you, but she's there. In that house, I froze. I went cold. I turned again toward that window, and there in the dark, behind the dull glass, I almost saw her face, and I knew maybe I was imagining it, that it was just me wanting to see her. But deep down, deep down, I was sure that whether I was seeing it or not, my grandmother was still there. Mrs. Marta told me she'd seen her walk past the windows facing her house, and that it never scared her. It fascinated her in a strange way, because she had been a skeptic until then. I woke up because of all the noise you were making on Wednesday. When that thing happened, she said. I looked out the window to make sure everything was okay. When your cousins ran out and you came after them, I saw your grandmother. It was the first time I saw her clearly, like flesh and blood. Until then, I'd only seen her silhouette in the windows. Just as Mrs. Marta was telling me that, Christian's car turned the corner. He stopped in front of the house and let Sara and Giovanni out. He motioned for us to wait while he looked for a place to park. Before going in, I said goodbye to Doña Marta, unsure whether what she had just told me was something I should share with my cousin. I had many doubts. Was my grandmother really there to protect us? Or was she being forced to remain in that house? Trapped there, living among those things that had taken over the place. Sarah told us she had overheard her mom on the phone the night before. Apparently, Uncle Manuel had decided to sell the house as soon as the title was in his name, something the rest of the family wasn't happy about. Come on, I want to check something before Alex gets here, Christian told us. We stepped into the house. From the yard, the angel greeted us, as macabre as ever. But I noticed that this time, I wasn't the only one trying not to look at it. Every time we blow out a candle, something comes, I told them. And right as I said that, a terrifying idea crossed my mind. What if my grandmother was suffering? What if she needed us to light one more candle for her so she could finally rest? That's when we realized Sarah wasn't with us. We started searching the house. We finally found her, turning the kitchen upside down. She was looking for something, and at last, she'd found it. It was a worn business card from Don Fidel, the handyman who used to do all the repairs around the house. Sarah explained that the day before, a boy around 16 had come by and spoken to her from the front gate. He kept peeking inside, like he was trying to see in, and specifically asked if everything was okay, and if they needed repairs in the back room, the one with the bedrooms. He said he was Don Fidel's son, so he had to know something. Sarah rushed out as soon as she said that. To my surprise, Alex was already waiting for her outside, and they walked off quickly while she dialed the number on the card. Let's go, Giovanni said, grabbing our attention. We need to see if this is real. I knew Giovanni needed to see it for himself too. It was hard for him to believe what we were saying, or to get involved in the investigation, unless he saw something so undeniable that no rational explanation could stand against it. I was honestly exhausted. I hadn't been sleeping well those days, and I didn't need to see anything else to believe what was happening. I told them I'd lie down in the living room for a while they did their experiments. I knew they were going to blow out some candles and wake up, so to speak, some of the things we'd already witnessed. So I grabbed one of the blankets we'd left in the living room and, with great fear, placed it over the angel in the garden. Almost as soon as I laid down on the couch, I fell into a deep sleep. I started having strange dreams, terrifying ones I can no longer remember clearly. Between dreams, between nightmares, I felt someone shaking me. Someone was violently pulling me to wake up. I thought it was one of my cousins, that something had happened. But when I opened my eyes, I saw a woman, her face completely covered by horrible black hair. A woman shaking me, leaning over me. In that moment, I swear I felt my heart stop. I shut my eyes tightly, and instantly, I stopped feeling her presence. I have to say it, of all the things that happened that week, this was one of the most terrifying. But at the same time, it's the one that still leaves me with the most doubts. I know very well it could have been sleep paralysis, but what happened next, I know with absolute certainty, was completely real. The light coming through the window, dimmer now, and its angle made me look at my watch. Hours had passed. It was already after 4 in the afternoon. I'd slept far longer than I thought. Next to me on the floor was the blanket I'd placed over the angel. As soon as I saw it, I bolted like a bat out of hell toward the bedrooms, shouting for my cousin, but no one answered. When I got to the candle room, around 5 of them were out. I don't know how many I managed to relight or replace. I just knew I had to light them. I did it quickly, and that's when a sound, crying from Grandpa's room caught my attention. Worried, because I had no idea where my cousins were, I went into the room. The crying was coming from under the bed. I stood there, staring at it, with no clue what could be underneath. I crouched down, and when I lifted the blanket, I saw that it was Christian. He was hiding under the bed, crying like a little kid. I stood up and asked him what had happened, but he kept asking me where Giovanni was. We went outside. I left him at the small corner store just a few meters from the house, and went back to find my other cousin. I searched the entire house, but found nothing. Nothing except a horrible stench that filled every corner. When I returned to Christian, he told me he had just spoken with Giovanni's mother. Giovanni was already at home. This is very strange because I never found out what happened to Giovanni after that day. Seriously, I never saw him again. Months later, he moved out of the city, saying he was going to study in Guadalajara, but he never even enrolled in university. Even today, he hasn't. I lost almost all contact with him. He doesn't even log into Facebook anymore. What happened with Christian, however, was very different. But we'll get to that. I got a call from Alex after spending the whole afternoon looking for him and convincing him. In the end, he managed to talk to Don Fidel's son. Don Fidel himself refused flatly to speak with Alex or Sarah, but his son was a bit more understanding when he saw their desperation. It's very important that you don't stay in the house after dark, but check in, please. Make sure the rules are clear, then get out of there, Alex told me. Although, as I said, I had just lit the candles, a big doubt started creeping in. What if one was about to go out and I hadn't noticed? Now that I think about it, it was completely irrational, but at that moment, I felt like something could happen. So I went back. I quickly entered the house and turned on the lights. A deep sadness flooded me to think that now I was scared to enter a place that had been my second home for so long, a place full of memory. I don't know if it was just sadness or fear, but I clearly felt something pressing on my chest. The candles were in order, but something told me one might fall, that it could cause an accident, a fire. It's very strange, I know, hard to explain. It was almost like a voice was putting those ideas into my head, although I don't remember an actual voice telling me that. I grabbed a bucket of water and put it under the table. If something happened, it would help to have water there. At least, that was my logic. I went for a glass of water and placed it on the table too. Then, I went for another, and one more. I lost track of how many I had brought until, while carrying another, I stopped. The table was full of glasses, as many as there were candles. And behind the table was the most horrible figure I've ever seen in my life. There, standing at the back of the room, was a man, or something humanoid, who seemed completely covered in what looked like wax or something similar. It was like he was covered in thick melted scales, and although I couldn't make out human features on his head, I sensed a smile directed at me. And with that smile, he raised a hand and blew out 2 candles on the table. I ran away. It was such a clear figure, so precise, so sharp, like nothing I had ever seen before. As clear as I can see this computer as I write this. When I ran outside, I noticed something in the yard, a figure next to the angel. I saw it only out of the corner of my eye, but it was a silhouette that, I swear to you, was almost definitely my grandfather. My grandfather sitting next to the fountain like he used to, but this time he was bent over as if holding his stomach, as if in pain. When I saw that and was about to turn to look at him face to face, it seemed the angel's figure moved closer to him, like to embrace him. That's all I remember. After that, I woke up in Christian's car. I don't know how I got there, but I did, in worse shape than he had been a while ago. I don't even know how, but after a few minutes we arrived at his girlfriend's house, where there was a party or gathering. We stayed there quietly, in shock. But somehow we felt protected, or at least that's how we felt, surrounded by so many people living their normal lives. We stayed there all night, and on Saturday afternoon we met with Alex at my house. He had already gone to the grandparents' house to check that room. He said that whatever it was, he felt worse every time. At that moment, Christian apologized to us. He told us he couldn't, nor wanted to, go on, and he wouldn't let us either. Alex then decided not to tell Christian what he now knew, which gave us a clear idea of what was happening in that place, or at least what had caused it. If he doesn't want to get involved anymore, that's fine. Really, Christian doesn't need to live knowing, he told me. Then, he told me the story he heard the next day. It was very important. My Uncle Manuel was finally going to take a priest to the house, a priest he had convinced to visit and bless it after Sunday masses in Seville. We're going too, Alex told me. And that Saturday night, the saddest I remember in my life. While we were having coffee, he told me the story. Don Fidel was reluctant from the very beginning. He immediately realized they hadn't called to offer him work. That was the only way they had gotten his address. However, it was clear he knew exactly which house Alex was talking about, the grandparents' house. He knew very well that both of them had already passed away. Later, we found out that it was he himself who asked his son to go check how things were going. But for some reason, he refused to share what he knew with my cousin, perhaps because he still saw them as children. After leaving his house disappointed and thinking they wouldn't get anywhere, they ran into Don Fidel's son, who was returning from doing a small job. His father's illness had gradually diminished his ability to go out and work, and the young man was increasingly taking full charge of the family business of repairs and simple maintenance services. For that reason, although he was very young, he was the right person to tell them exactly what had happened in the grandparents' house, what very likely triggered everything that came afterward. It all started as a routine repair. A house as old as that needed constant maintenance. so it wasn't unusual for the grandparents to call Don Fidel every time a new problem appeared. This time, however, it would require heavier work, especially breaking a floor and digging, so Don Fidel took his son and 2 helpers to assist him that weekend. Suddenly, after digging almost a meter to find the source of a leak in the pipes, they found a small chest. In the yard, they had once found valuable things buried, something common in houses that had gone through the revolution, like on that other occasion. They planned to wait for the grandparents to open the chest and inspect it. However, when they pulled it out, they noticed other things underneath, covered with cloths. A little deeper, there was another chest, and more cloth bags containing something inside. When the grandparents arrived, they entered that room to check. Don Fidel asked his son and the helpers to leave. The boy, disobeying, stayed watching through a crack in the door. When they began to uncover what was wrapped in the cloth, the grandparents' expressions changed from expectation to worry and then almost disgust. They kept taking things out of the cloth bags, one by one, placing them on that old wooden table. The boy couldn't see what they were pulling out, but eventually they reached 2 small chests. The grandmother's scream when she opened the first one must have echoed throughout the entire block. The fright made the boy run to the garden and hide behind the angel. There, he saw the grandmother run out and head to the other side of the house toward the kitchen, where she started talking on the phone. The boy, hoping not to be seen, approached the room again, but this time the door was closed. He could only hear the grandfather repeating inside, "It can't be! It can't be!" And he also heard his father, Don Fidel, asking the grandfather to calm down. When they returned from a break, Don Fidel told the other 2 helpers to leave and his son to wait in the kitchen for a while. That little while they promised him turned into several hours until it got dark. Then several men arrived at the house. From how familiar they spoke to each other, the boy believes they were friends of the grandfather, who shortly after left carrying everything they had found. Don Fidel told his son it was time to go home. He didn't say a word in the car, but halfway down a dark street, he stopped, got out, and vomited. He screamed and with tears in his eyes, returned to the car without saying a single word, not even a glance. When they arrived home, he only asked his son to go in and not say anything to his mother. He stayed in the car. After a while, he went inside and went straight to the bedroom without eating. That was all the boy knew for sure. But little comments he heard afterward, conversations between his parents, random words, made him suspect what they had found that time. They were hands. They seemed real, human. What was there looked like the shape of a baby. Phrases that were lost. Unconnected words he heard his father mumble in his sleep while having nightmares. The young man told them, "I don't really know exactly what they found there. My father went back to finish that job alone, and since then he's been sick. After that, it was up to me to do repairs on that house. But I never really knew what happened. I never knew what they found. But I do know they awakened something that, from then on, made everything there change forever." Alex told me what the boy had said. I couldn't stop looking at him, surprised. I never imagined the grandparents in that situation struggling with that kind of thing. They always seemed so peaceful, but I didn't understand why Alex started to shed tears while sharing everything they had told him. "Really? That sounds exaggerated, out of place even. What's wrong, Alejandro?" "It's not that bad," I told him. He looked at me seriously and replied, "I talked to someone else, someone who, in confidence, told me the stories of those who lived before in the grandfather's family house. I don't know if you want to hear them, Ernesto. These are things that, for some reason, they never shared with their children, and even less with their grandchildren." When he said that, I knew there was no turning back, so I asked him to tell me. Then, Alex spoke to me about our ancestors. He told me things about occult practices some of them did in the early 20th century, right in the middle of the revolution, which was terrible for thousands of people caught between 2 sides that would neither give in nor concede anything, and for whom the innocent didn't matter. Afterward, he told me 2 stories from the 1940s and 1950s, those supposed years of progress for the country, in which that house, our house, seemed to have been frozen in time. There were several incredible stories, some even shared in chronicles of that era. One was the sworn revenge of a soldier against his cruel landowner, a ruthless man who tortured the laborers and abused their women. When the revolution broke out, a young laborer who had seen that horrible man torture his older brother to death swore he would kill him. He wanted to take revenge using his daughter, replicating what the landowner had done to the women. About to fall into the hands of the rebels, the landowner managed to escape with his little girl, helped by one of the girl's nannies. Although he was an evil man, he had trusted friends in this city, including my grandfather's family. He asked them to hide the girl in the house, but they refused. They said it was impossible to put the whole family at risk just for him. They did agree, however, to keep the daughter until he found another place to keep her safe. Weeks later, they had to leave the house to take refuge in another city because it was too dangerous to stay. But at the moment they left, the girl was nowhere to be found. They searched for hours all over the house and the street, asked neighbors around, but no one saw her. Knowing it was impossible to wait for her, they left. When they eventually returned, almost a year later, they boarded up the walls and windows and found the little girl's corpse, which had been dead no more than 2 months, according to the doctor. That meant she had spent months completely alone, feeding on who knows what, in complete darkness and agony in that same house. In the 1930s, an older brother of the grandfather had left school at a young age. They locked her in that back room, isolated from everyone else. Over time, the siblings began to worry. She screamed at night, cried all day, begging to be let out. When the parents finally allowed it, it was only to lock her up in a convent. The siblings never heard from her again. Hearing these stories, the same connections formed in my head that Alex surely had made, but neither of us dared to say them out loud. He told me many more stories, tales shared with him in a context completely outside what we would consider paranormal. Stories his mother told as anecdotes about the eccentricities of people from another time. But for us, all this was terrifying. Every detail could mean something important. When we arrived, Manuel, who was in the house, greeted us accompanied by 2 priests. We talked with them for a while, and it seemed extremely strange how understanding both were and how they didn't seem to doubt our stories about the things we had experienced there. "You'd be surprised at the things we sometimes have to deal with," said one of the priests, the older one. The other, whom I remembered seeing at Grandma's funeral dressed in plain clothes, was very serious but seemed to know more about it. He told us that Grandma had once shared certain things that happened in that house. "I know that at some point, strange things started happening here, and that holy water and what I did to help them weren't enough. So your grandmother turned to something else, to other kinds of beliefs," he said very regretfully, hoping the person listening would understand. When he finished, we looked at him confused, and maybe noticing this, he clarified, "Don't worry, your grandmother wasn't exactly Catholic or religious, so this isn't a confession or anything like that, because she shared it with me in a conversation. But I think it's more important now that you understand what was already happening back then." They proceeded to bless the house and pray in each room, but the priest was very clear. "We've already done this, and it didn't work." Though we were going to do it, Alex asked at the last minute not to tell my Uncle Manuel anything about what we had discovered. When the priests left, my uncle asked us to stay a while we had coffee. Again, he said he had a plan. "I have to stay here tonight, and I would appreciate it if you stayed too," he told us. Before accepting, he asked us to wait for the others to arrive. Then he left the house for a moment and returned accompanied by a woman, a short girl of about 30 with short hair. She was carrying a board that, at first glance, I would have said was a Ouija board, but it was nothing I had ever seen before. "Make yourselves at home," my uncle said. "Prepare whatever you need." Alex asked what was happening. Then, someone saying my name caught my attention. I was in the living room, and that voice seemed to come from the kitchen, which was completely dark. "Ernesto," I heard clearly again, someone calling my name. So I slowly approached, and barely lit by the moonlight coming through a crack in the curtain, I could see the silhouette of a woman, a familiar silhouette. The rest called me my uncle. "Please go get some dinner while we start preparing everything." He gave me some bills, and I left dazed, still hearing that voice coming from the kitchen, which I somehow felt throughout my whole body. I remember very well that when I came back with the food on the street by my grandparents' house, just about 40 or 50 meters away from me, I saw that silhouette again. The silhouette I had seen in the kitchen, my grandmother's silhouette, but young and slender, like I had never known her. The street lamp's light, which was right between us, was strong enough to blind me and hide her behind that illumination, but I could see her. She was there, looking at me. As soon as I thought about speaking to her, just thought about it, she turned around and completely disappeared into the darkness. That was the last time I saw her, or that anyone saw her. I'm not sure about anything that happened in this stage of our lives, but one of the very few certainties I have is that day, my grandmother and I made peace, and that she showed me that in some way she was no longer tied to that house, those candles, and everything that inhabited it. Seeing her finally outside was total peace for me. When I went inside, I was surprised to find Alex, my Uncle Manuel, and the younger priest, who had been with us that afternoon, watching from outside as the girl prepared her board in the candle room. "Do you really think it's a good idea to play with a Ouija board here?" I asked them, very angry. "It's not a Ouija board," my uncle said as he took me by the shoulder. "And well, to this day, I don't know what it was, but surely some of you will know better than I what that board was, as it had a very similar shape. From what I understood, more than to contact spirits and have them answer your questions, this board is like a tool to guide the dead, to offer them support from this spiritual plane. Let's give this a chance," Alex told me. According to what the priest told us last time, between my grandparents, Don Fidel, and the mother of that girl who was now beginning to learn about incense, they had managed to contain in that room whatever had started to invade the house, since they found the chests. "Almost everything is ready," the girl said. "At midnight, we're going to start." I don't know if the girl really knew what she was doing, but there was a mix of practices that confused me. Gregorian chants could be heard, our own parts and prayers in Latin, religious figures of all kinds, and a box of candles that emitted a horrible stench, even when they were unlit. "This is going to take a long time," she told us. "With these candles, I'm going to try to attract what inhabits this house. One candle for each presence. But these candles are made of living flesh, and when they go out, they will never appear here. living flesh. I don't know what it meant exactly, but that was the phrase that got stuck, tattooed in my memory. The priest gave us his blessing and said he would stay nearby, out on the street, in case we needed anything from him. I then assumed that we had crossed the limits of what even a priest as modern and liberal as him could tolerate. The girl asked my Uncle Manuel to take a candle from the room and then come out with it. "When I tell you, you're going to blow it out," she said. My uncle nervously went inside, came out seconds later with a candle, and walked toward the house entrance. "Blow it out," the woman told him. He did so with a puff. The tallow candles the woman had wouldn't light. She tried lighting one, but other matches burned out before it could catch fire. I heard a scream from my uncle, and then how he ran out toward the street. A little later, he told us that while he was standing in the foyer, when he blew out the candle, suddenly his reflection in the mirror began to fade, until it became just a blur. While we listened, he felt that we were getting farther and farther away, as if that blur that was his reflection was becoming safe, and suddenly, a woman in black was in front of him, trying to grab him by the chest. Moments later, he learned why he ran out to the street, where everything seemed to return to normal. The candle lit moments later, and then it was my turn. Actually, it was Alex's turn, but I was so scared that I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. I took a candle and went out. I froze in the hallway, and against my initial plan, which was to run to the kitchen, one of the brightest rooms in the house, before the woman gave me the signal, something blew out my candle. I don't know if it was a draft or something else, but as I walked down the dark hallway, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the silhouette of the angel starting to come down from its place. I was petrified. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that as I resumed walking, as I took another step, that thing moved again, just like that, as I walked. Then I saw, beside it, sitting on that fountain, the silhouette of my grandmother. And with each step I took, that thing got closer and closer to her. But something inside me told me my grandmother was safe, that she was out of there. Summoning courage, instead of running, I headed straight to the kitchen and turned to run right toward the patio, toward the angel's figure. When I saw it face to face, I realized the figure was in its place, that no one else was there, that perhaps everything was in my head. Alex told me to return the candle, that it was already lit. He went into the room, took a candle, and came out. I noticed it was a slightly heavier candle, one from the center that I hadn't remembered to replace. It barely fit between his two hands. I remember his look very well. Alex's gaze, barely illuminated by that candle. He looked at me and smiled, like a child about to play a prank, as if for a moment he wasn't himself. The lights were off. The only thing allowing us to see a little beyond our eyes was the light of the candles inside the room and the matches of the woman, nervously trying to light the candle she was holding. Suddenly, she screamed and her candle fell to the floor, breaking. Extremely heavy footsteps, like those of a huge animal, were heard in the room. In the shadow cast by the candles, I could see something resembling, let me say it, a billy goat, as if it were standing in the middle of the room. A snort was heard, and all the candles in the room went out. We were in complete darkness. Have you heard that recording of the sounds of hell? That sound they accidentally recorded during an excavation several kilometers deep? Something very similar started sounding inside my head at that moment, while Alex and I lit matches and ran toward the room. Before closing the door, I saw the hallway fill with figures, blurry silhouettes, slowly walking toward us. When the light of a candle lit behind me, I could swear one of those figures touched me. I don't know if that happened with the others, but the door, what I had just seen, made me dizzy. They were like people, but out of focus, as if I couldn't see them completely. We lit one by one, not only the 33 candles, but also all the ones in the room, the horribly smelling candles the woman brought. We were only able to light 18. We never found the others. Nothing was ever the same again. The woman told us she didn't know how to solve the problem after that attempt, and asked us not to call her anymore. If she had to go to that house, it would be on her own. The priest who was supposed to be outside vanished. I never found out what happened to him, or if he was really a priest. My Uncle Manuel inherited the house, and even before the paperwork was in order, he was already renting it out as an office for a government agency. I don't know if that included the room, or if the candles are still there. That agency lasted very little time, and the house was empty again. Manuel never spoke about what happened, and when Alex dared to bring it up, Manuel denied everything, making Alejandro look like a liar, and worse, like an unbalanced person. Alejandro was actually treated for bipolar disorder, depression, and the last thing my aunt told me is that they were starting to give him common medications for schizophrenia patients. I never denied anything he said, but nobody asked me directly either, and after seeing how they treated him, I decided not to say anything. Within the family, nobody knows, only some of my closest friends. Sarah still makes comments about it, but her character is so sarcastic that no one seems to take her seriously. I've seen Alex and Manuel so badly recently, acting like they easily ignore everything, that I've wondered more than once how much of it was true, how much really happened. Maybe I should go back and see that room. Sarah's constant warnings remind me that we really witnessed something terrible. It pains me a lot to say this, but I think I have to. After a very clumsy suicide attempt, everyone except Sarah and Alex started treating me differently. I can't explain it. I'd be lying if I said I tried because of what happened or what I'm telling in this story. story. I won't bore you with all the details, but I feel that somehow it influenced me, even if just a little bit. Things in my life entered a terrible phase, and since what happened in that room, I feel like something constantly drains my energy, like something consumes me every day, day after day. I'm open to all your questions and will try to answer as best as I can. I hope you don't ask for many explanations, because I tell you now, I don't have them. I wish I had them. I wish I understood. You know, if you build theories about this, if you try to find meaning in all this chaos, God knows I've tried.